Good. Welcome everyone. Glad to see everyone. We're going to go over a couple of different parts, as Nick mentioned. Let's go over the kind of the pitch competition guidelines and the judging criteria. So there's a 4-minute pitch. That's essentially what you're going to be judged on. You'll be pitching multiple times, so you kind of see different judges and get different scores. Okay, so some of the main questions that we need to address, essentially, what's your problem, right? And be able to explain it. What's your solution? What progress did you make during the competition? Who really needs your solution now? And I'll talk about that a little bit tonight. How would you make money if it is like a revenue model? Well, yeah, just explain to me like how you actually make money. Like how does this actually become a business instead of like donating your own time to run it? And then what will be your next steps? So the judging criteria is simplified. This competition, we're realistic, right? So you have essentially a week to hopefully do some type of prototype MVP like we talked about last night. And so we're not expecting you to be like full-fledged, I've already got revenue within 2 weeks. So the judging criteria is a little bit different than one of our other bigger competitions in the spring, the Idaho Entrepreneur Challenge. This one has 4 parts. So how well does the solution solve the problem? So as we mentioned before, sometimes the solution can actually cause worse problems. Is your solution actually solving the problem? So I'll pause there just to do a call out that no problem is weighted one above the other. So if you pick problem 6 and problem 2 has a deeper financial impact, we're treating all problems the same. It's more of how well you solve that individual problem. Here's one of the big ones that some of the teams missed last year. Likelihood of adoption by industry professionals. So there were some really cool ideas of how to structure a home better, but they didn't go do the legwork of like actually talking to home builders. And the first thing when they got to the judges was like, well, that violates code. Like that, we couldn't do that if we wanted to because of XYZ. You don't want to be in that position where you're in the judges thing and the first comments are like, well, let me tell you the logistical or the legal reasons on why that would not work. So that's why, going back to customer discovery, as soon as you have some type of idea or prototype, you want to go back to your problem sponsor and say, why have you guys not done this? Like that's a good way to phrase things. Like, why have you not done this? Or what would, almost like you're almost looking for negatives. I think that's one of the best routes and tips I give you when you're trying to get ideas on feedback is don't say, hey, how do you like this? Because they're all going to be nice to you. But look for like, why wouldn't this work? Why don't you do this now? That's a good tip. Okay, likelihood of the entrepreneur team executing the idea. So I think like, on our side, we want to see businesses continue to grow. And ideally we see the point where eventually we think businesses could be funded. Like if the idea is good enough and the team's good enough, like over time. So how well are you going to be on executing the idea? Full transparency, there's going to probably be a different, not weighting scale, but unofficially, they're probably going to grade the public track a little bit different than the student track, right? Like they do acknowledge you're a student, you're full-time. They're not expecting you to quit your job next week. But that said, like, do you have the chops to do it? Like if they invest in you as a person, could you start something? And I think that can be proven through the minimum viable product, right? Like how quickly were you able to produce something to test? If it's just an idea land over 2 weeks, I don't know. We'll see. And then how much progress did the team make during the competition? So same thing, that can be measured in like how many people did you interview? So, I have one unnamed student that met with his problem sponsor and he's already like trying to talk to like 5 or 6 others that are not officially listed through our competition. Like he's literally going out and saying, I'm part of this competition, I need your feedback to their home builders. That is going to give him an infinite amount of data, more data and feedback than like, hey, I just worked with Adam and no one else, and this is Adam's opinion, and I want to win because Adam thinks it's a good idea. Right? It's a little bit, you can go a little bit deeper and say, I talked to 7 professionals, I talked to 3 companies. And then also, how well did you do on your minimum viable product? Did you actually get something out to test? Okay, so let's translate this into the pitch. Well, it looks like a lot of slides. It actually flows really nice. All you're doing is a team intro. I'm such and such. So if you have a team name, great. If not, I'm Ryan. You're going to restate the problem. So I think, as I mentioned before, sometimes a problem might need like a setup and then the real problem. So a problem is people have to move dirt, but the real problem is that moving in dirt costs $3,000 per home. And that means it's X amount per year. So you can split this up into multiple slides if it makes more sense. The wrong thing to do is try to cram everything in, where like you're telling me a whole story that probably needs 2 or 3 slides. So use big pictures. So if you can see my screen here, like this one here, like this template, that'd be a good one where it's primarily a picture, a title, maybe a subtitle or something, but there's not a lot of words. You're telling me the story. Even over Zoom, you're owning it and you're telling me the story. Okay, then I'm introducing my service or product. So here's the problem. Here's what my service or product does. And then here's my solution. So we talked about that last class. So here's where we're going to start moving on later in the pitch. So here's my big solution. So last class we talked about, okay, like everyone wants the car, everyone wants to build the car, but on this competition, we're starting with the scooter. So this is where you're going to transition judges. The solution is your car. You're saying, this is the long-term solution. This is what we think is going to work. To test my idea, here was my scooter. So that's the transition point. This is really where we're going to start winning the trust of judges is, did you navigate and say, okay, this is the real value. I think this is the solution in place, but could I actually execute it on a super small, basic way to get feedback? So at this stage, I'm just saying what my MVP was. So my MVP was, we mocked up a website. We mocked up this software. We created this tool. We did this prototype. Whatever it is, just describe what it is. Then your next slide, which I'd recommend, and this is all flexible. I'm just telling you, like, here's the general flow. All this is flexible. If I were to explain what my MVP is, then my next is just, okay, what were the results of my MVP? So you told me, okay, we decided to do a mock-up website or a mock-up app. Great, what happened next? So this is just a logical story, right? So, well, we presented to 7 people and this is the feedback that we got. So after that, so ideally you got good feedback, or like at least you're honest in what the feedback was. And now you're starting to answer the question, okay, moving forward. So now we're back into like future land, okay? Future land, who needs this now? So we'll talk about this a little bit more next class, but people that say like all home builders is probably not specific enough. So you can eventually say all home builders really need this, but these are the ones that I want to target first. So you're just identifying who your initial target market is. And then I think somewhere in here, I'm going to add one more. It can be, how do you make money? So that's just the, that's just how essentially your revenue model, right? So is it like a product? Is it a software? It's month over month. Is it a service fee? Is it like whatever it might be? Like just explain to me how you would make money and stay in business. Last one are, what are your next steps? So, okay, so after this competition, when we move forward and continue to build this business, this is the next steps. So it'd be maybe the next MVP, or maybe you need more interviews, or maybe you need something, but just tell me like what you're doing after the competition. And then the last thing is just the introduction of yourself. The bridge for me is usually like, and we're the team to execute it, right? Because you just told me what you're gonna do, and now you're giving me the confidence, like, and I'm the person to do it. Like, here's my history. You don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but essentially it's just like the kicker to say like, yep, I'm it. And then you're just gonna say, thanks so much for listening. Any questions? So this is literally the template. It's shared in the link, but this is really what's gonna help you kind of drive the conversation. So today we're just gonna briefly talk about pivoting and just a couple pieces of that. So you had your own MVP ideas, right? Or you should at least be thinking of your MVP ideas, and that rolls into the test card. So we talked about last time, if you have an MVP or you're going to test something, this is the tool to formally write it down. So I think I'm going to increase production by, or I think I'm going to save money if I do blah, blah, blah. And you're just going to tell me how we measure it. Okay. So this is the way to translate that. So there's 2 cards. There's one before the test and one after the test. All right. Sorry, I need to present.
All right, let's discover the learning card together. Learning card is really a tool to capture the learnings from your experiments. So let's go through the different sections here. The first section is, you obviously want to give it a name, you want to assign it to a person, in our case it's Natasha, and you want to give it a date. Let's get to the core of the content. Your first section is the description of your hypothesis. Let me use an example from what we learned at Strategizer. We believe that product managers are interested in the value proposition canvas. That was our hypothesis. So let's look at what we observed. We observed that 32% of product managers clicked on the link we had sent them. And we had set a target at 25%. So in our case, it was good news. Here you also want to describe the reliability of the data that you get. Next, you want to capture your learnings and insights. Again, here in our case, we say that from that observation, we learned that product managers can actually be a potential customer segment for the online course. And here you also want to indicate if there is a drastic action required. If what you learn might be putting you out of business, then you want to identify something to do about it. Finally, you want to describe your decisions and actions. In our example, we say, therefore, we will test if an online course generates a high click-through rate as well. So there you have it. 4 very quick sections to describe the learnings from your experiment and to take you further into your progress.
Okay, so just as a review, remember the green card is before. You're saying like, here's my assumption, here's essentially what I think is going to happen, and this is my like make or break metric. So either I'm going to save them 8 hours or I don't. I'm either going to help them save 20% or I don't, or whatever problem you're trying to solve. There should be a metric that essentially says like you made it or not. If you don't have a pass or fail metric, then you're really hurting the way this setup is. Because then you come back and you essentially say, okay, here's what I thought was going to happen. This is what did happen. And this is really where entrepreneurship takes off. From that, we learned. So failures can be huge learnings.